All right, time for day 4 of Adventure Code. So day 4 was the passport problem. You get a bunch of text like this, and wherever you see like the blank line, right, each one of these is an individual passport with a bunch of name value pairs, which are the fields. And you got to count how many of these passports are valid. Valid means that 8 of these 9 fields, 8, 7, 7 or 8 of these 9 fields are required. So let's take a look at my code for part 1. First, I had to parse up the input, and I usually have pre-existing helper methods to parse it up. Today I didn't, so I wrote this paragraphs helper method. When I first solved this, I have a lines helper method that breaks up into each individual line, but it throws away the empty lines, so it doesn't really help me here. And when I first solved it, I didn't have this method, so I did some ugly stuff, splitting it and looping and looking for blank lines. But I figured this would be much nicer and maybe helpful in other days. And all it's doing is it's just looking for double line breaks, and it handles both the Windows or the Linux variety. So I'm going to split it up into chunks of text that represent each individual passports, which may still be multi-line text. And then I'm just going to convert it into a list of dictionaries, a dictionary representing a passport. So I create this parse passport function, takes in the multi-line text that is an individual passport. I just break it up into each line, break each line up into words, splitting it up on the spaces. And then each word is a name value pair, so I split it on the colon, and I add it to this dictionary. And when I'm done, I return this dictionary object, which represents a passport. And then all I do is I have a function for part 1 called hasAllFields, which basically takes a passport and validates if it's good or not. And all I do is I call counts on my list and count how many of them this returns true for. So hasAllFields is just, this is the list of required fields, and it basically just loops through all fields and makes sure all of them are contained within the passport. And this is the link all method. Pretty helpful in Advent problems. As part 1, part 2, very similar, except I just have a different validation function, isValidPassport. First thing this does is it calls the hasAllFields from part 1. And assuming that's good, what I did is I just wrote a separate function to validate each field with all the different rules. The code ended up, kind of long. These are like 200 lines of code or so. And I thought a bunch about whether I should write this with regexes. I'm sure a lot of people use regexes. I thought about it, and ultimately my goal here is to try to write, really clean code, at least when I'm refactoring it after I've solved it. So I thought, what would be cleaner? If I did this with regexes, the code would certainly be shorter. And shorter is usually better, and I value short code. When I'm thinking about what makes really good code, to me, the most important thing is that it's easy to read the code and understand what it's doing, and ultimately be able to change it with confidence. Right? And short code usually means it's easier to read and understand than longer code that does the same thing. But regexes, I don't really like regexes. Maybe because I don't have a lot of experience with them, so I'm not very proficient with them. But even if I was, I feel like regexes are kind of cryptic. I know they're super powerful, but they're pretty cryptic. You come back to anything more than a trivial regex a year later, how easy it is to understand that. How easy is it to debug that? And I think in this case, the more verbose code without regexes just ends up being cleaner, better code, in my opinion. So, these 8 or so functions, you can go look at my code if you're interested. Not all that much interesting going on in them. The first 4 of them are all basically doing the same thing, validating that the field is a valid like year, and that it's between a certain range. So I just created an isValid year that makes sure it's 4 characters long, that those 4 characters are a valid number, and that it's between the range. For the height, I split it up into the units, centimeter or inches, and the numeric value, make sure the numeric value is actually a number. Depending on the units, check that it's in a range. Nothing all that interesting in here. For the HCL one, this is basically a hex code, it looks like. So I just made sure the first character was a hashtag, and then I wrote a little helper method is hex. I thought I had this from previous years, but I couldn't find it. So is hex just validates that all the characters in the string are valid hexadecimal characters. And that's it. 180 or so lines of code. I don't feel like it's super clean, but it's as clean as I could make it. If I run it, part 1 runs in 7 milliseconds, part 2, 2 milliseconds. I punched in all the samples from the website as tests. That all passed. Life is good. See you tomorrow.